Okay. Well, that was something. We're back again. I did reset the timer back to where it was when we started earlier. Since last one, it didn't count. My ISP was being mean. Welcome everyone. So sorry about the delay and the little hiccup here and there. Looks like it is somewhat stable. I can still see it dropping slightly for like 2 seconds or so, but it doesn't look like it's as bad as it was earlier. So let's try to ride this out and see how it goes. Hopefully that's all it's gonna be for now, instead of lagging for like 10 minutes and so on. Like, it's just gonna have a couple seconds of drops and come right back. That's really all I could ask for right now. Sorry, I'm Asian. It's in my blood to apologize. But yes. Alright, so once again, welcome back everyone. We are going to be doing our creepypasta reading today. I have 3 stories ready for you. Let's see. First, as you can see on the screen, the title is called The Memories of the Graveyard Shift. So this one is a little bit more longer than the other 2 that I picked out. But it should give us maybe enough time for like at least 3 hours maybe. Let me make a pin message real quick. Pin. Yes. No. 3 stories. I said 3 stories. 1 somewhat long one and 2 little bit shorter ones. Yeah. Do let me know at any time if it looks like stream's actually starting to lag really bad like earlier. Remember we did 2 stories last week, but it was quite long, wasn't it? Alright, here we go. Grab a drink or a snack, a popcorn or something, and sit back and relax. Gonna put this over here. Let me reorganize real quick. This over here. Alright. Alright, here we go. Memories of the Graveyard Shift by D.D. Howard. I was 18 at the time. I just graduated from high school, and what was probably a really exciting and memorable time for most people was a stressful race against time for me. You see, my dad was very traditional. If I were going to be living in this house after high school, even just over the summer between graduation and college, I needed a job. If not, I was freeloading, and he swore with an adamance I certainly didn't care to test that I'd be out on the street if I was unemployed for long. I'd had months of preparation. Hell, years really. This entire time, I could have been looking. He certainly hadn't waited until now to clue me in on the terms of living with him after high school. But I just wasn't the type to care that much about anything until I was days from the deadline. Finding a job back then wasn't easy. I dyed my hair green, and my nose and lips were pierced, not to mention the gauges and the shifty stick and poke snake on my forearm I'm sorry, not shifty, a shitty stick and poke snake on my forearm that my 16-year-old self had afflicted upon me. Case in point, I wasn't getting hired most places. And being that I had about a week at the time left to figure it out, like usual, I was in a mad scramble to line something up before facing the consequences. But then, as if some morbid miracle, a cop got shot and killed on 84th Avenue, pretty close to the pass and go out there. An opening for the night shift position appeared not long after. Oh no, lag. Please come back. Please come back. Please come back. Okay, we're good. The pass and go and 84th Avenue as a whole had a pretty bad reputation. See, 84th was one of the only roads in town still unpaved at parts, namely the north end shortly after the pass and go. And it wound along a pretty deep drainage ditch where no guardrails had ever been built, even after decades of complaints. There was a particularly tight bend up the road where a lot of drunk drivers and speeding teens learned that they were not in fact invincible, some of them even taking that lesson to the grave with them. And the lack of streetlights just made it all the more dangerous. But those were just the logical concerns. In a tiny town like mine, people are bored enough to run with sensational bullshit, and so 84th could never just be a dangerous road with poor construction and lack of safety measures to blame, but was instead cursed and haunted. People died there so often, not because it was just a hazardous roadway, but because it was bloodthirsty evil. People's reception went out on the road not because it was essentially the furthest you could be from town, but because some malicious entity wanted you isolated. You get it. The woods beyond the ditch were even worse. On 3 occasions since the turn of the century, bodies were found out there, 1 a suicide and 2 in shallow graves. And in a town as small as mine had been, that's a pretty sizable number. For a criminal, though, it only made sense to bury them there. Again, this place was basically abandoned and totally secluded. Really, the only other people that far northwest of town were the waggies at the pass and go, and they weren't getting paid enough to be on the lookout for anything. I think that's supposed to be wages. Not to mention, they had their own weirdness to deal with. All sorts of strange and illegal activities happened in that pothole-ridden parking lot. And why wouldn't it? That place was the last beacon of humanity's presence in the town for miles, until you got to 90th Street, the main road shooting off from the highway. So anybody working there had enough going on at their own doorstep, and wouldn't be paying any attention to cars pulled off on the side of the road with mysteriously heavy duffel bags in the trunk. Suffice it to say, once the position opened, I was the only person in town out of options enough to drop off an application. And wouldn't you know it, I was scheduled to start 2 days later. I picked it up quick. The job was easy, and though at first I was shadowing a guy that by all counts could have been undead, I was left to my own devices a week later. To be honest, I actually kind of liked the job at first. 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. were pretty standard hours for consciousness for me anyway. And working the graveyard shift finally gave me an excuse to sleep in until 3. It was dead most nights. Sometimes, and I'm not exaggerating, I literally didn't see a single customer. And other nights, the goofiness of my interactions with various druggies kept things interesting. But those kinds of nights aren't what this story is about. The first time I remember being pretty confused was only 2 weeks after I started the job. I was pretty stoned at the time, so I tensed up when I saw a cop walking towards the door. But I wasn't complacent enough to blaze it before work without eye drops for fear of these exact situations. Not so much worried about getting arrested, but about what my dad would do to me. I also had a little bit of a heads up in the form of a faulty open sign in the window. The neon would pretty often flicker or dim for some reason when people were coming up to the door. Really couldn't tell you why it happened, but when I was totally fucking off behind the counter, it was my cue to act natural for a minute. And since a bunch of random bullshit was stacked up on the side of the counter to my left facing the parking lot and the pumps, I couldn't ever see out the windows unless I was actively looking for it or looking over it. So needless to say, whatever was wrong with that sign certainly wasn't something I was going to try and get fixed. When the cop walked in, I sort of leaned back as casually as possible and tried to make small talk with him so his mind wouldn't wander anywhere else. See any crazies? I inquired. Not yet, he answered. Perusing the energy drinks like a selection of fine wines. He sounded pretty bored, and I hoped that that wasn't an indication that he was looking for something to do. Well, lucky you, I chuckled. Can't say the same myself. Yeah? He settled on a sugar-free monster. He walked over to the counter, and I remember thinking he was either a new guy or one of those officers that just never stopped being motivated, going off his short hair and fresh fade. Though judging off how young he looked, definitely early 20s, I was going with the former. These were the worst types of cops from my experience. They're always looking for a way to stand out to their higher-ups. Yeah, I continued. Saw a lady sleeping in a shopping cart out back. Asked her why the shopping cart, And she says she learned from a TV show that you should never sleep on the bare ground. You learn something new every day. I smirked. That actually happened last week, but who's counting? He actually smiled slightly. Weirdos, man. Yeah. Will that be all? Yeah. $3.29. He tapped his card on the reader, and while the sale processed, I remember actually feeling slightly concerned for the guy. I wasn't a big fan of cops, but one of them had died around here recently, after all. And just talking with this guy face to face sort of humanized him to me. As he cupped the top of the drink and slid it off the counter, I said, "Stay safe out there." He glanced at me and raised an eyebrow. You know something I don't? Nah, just, that cop that got shot out there a couple weeks ago. Huh? I just stared at him. Listen. He peered at my name tag for a second. Carter, you can't believe everything you hear about this place. 84th Avenue. It's just a street, man. Most of what you hear about this place is embellished or even totally made up. Yeah, alright. Well, have a good night, officer. I paused, squinting at his name tag back. Brady. He walked off into the night, his energy drink in his hand. At the time, I didn't give that interaction a whole lot of thought. I learned most of my news from memes, and it was definitely possible I'd been wrong. Unlikely, but possible. But over time, stranger things began to occur. And I'm not talking about druggies sleeping in shopping carts. I began to pick up on an anomaly with the neon sign. See, it actually didn't flicker very often. It seemed to at first, but after getting caught off guard multiple times by random people coming in, I realized I couldn't trust it as much as I thought I could. Yet strangely, though it seemed inconsistent, I realized it always blinked and dimmed for certain people. There was this lady that would come in about once a week and buy a scratch-off ticket. I figured she had to be pretty depressed, 'cause she was always wearing the same clothes, and was coming to this dingy-ass place with relative frequency. Every time she'd ask for the same ticket, cash Kaiser. Was it Kaiser? Oh. And every time I slide it to her, she'd smile at me and say, "Maybe tonight's the night." Even in her voice, I could hear how much she needed a break. But I guess tonight was never the night, 'cause a week or two later, she'd always be back, always dressed the same, always buying a colorful strip of false hope that things would suddenly change for her. I tried to chat with her the more she came in, but she wasn't keen on giving away details about her life. She was mostly unresponsive, just nodding or giving me one-word answers. And then she'd head out in kind of a hurry. But her clothes weren't the only thing that stayed the same every time. Every single time she came into the pass and go, that sign would flicker. Now, I could have just been reading into things too much. I wondered if the sign was ultimately connected to a wire through the ground, maybe. And maybe certain people were stepping over it. And those people just kind of came in the same way every time. I didn't really know. I'm not an electrician. But the sort of Groundhog Day that transpired every time she stopped by really did intrigue me. Then, one night in early July, I had another curious experience. I was listening to some podcast about ayahuasca and contemplating if I'd ever take the plunge when the green flicker of my inconsistent early warning system caught my attention. And when my eyes trailed from the neon sign and over the merchandise on the counter to the pumps out in the dark beyond, I saw a guy pumping gas into his truck, probably in his mid-30s. He had this really gruff look on his face, but I wouldn't have paid it much mind except for the fact someone was with him, a girl about my age. While he was busy by the pump, she was heading into the store. She had black hair down to about her shoulders and these big brown eyes. Her skin was kind of pale, like she probably didn't get out much, and she wore skinny jeans and a gray top. As soon as I noticed her approaching, I stepped back from the window. I definitely didn't want to creep her out by being seen peeking over the counter through the glass. She came in, and as the chime above the door rang, I couldn't help but glance at her as she beelined to the snacks. She was cute, and I was considering flirting with her at first. But then, I glanced over the counter, I glanced over the counter again at the guy in the parking lot, presuming him to be her big brother or dad or something. I didn't want to piss him off, so I decided to keep it casual. She was over by the coolers on the back wall the next time I found her, not looking my direction while she scanned our selection of sports drinks. When she grabbed a red Gatorade and came walking up to the front, she put the drink and a bag of classic Lays on the counter, and when I noticed it was almost 4 in the morning, I couldn't help but inquire, "What got you out so late?" I was scanning the items with muscle memory, my eyes meeting hers after she glanced at the counter for a second, as if considering a response. "Nothing really." big bro? I flicked my eyes to the guy in the parking lot, and at this, her nose wrinkled. Ew, no. I thought that was a strange response. Ew? I asked as the total popped up on the screen. It's gross to have a brother? It's gross to kiss your brother. She smiled flatly, and I didn't want to seem creepy, but I couldn't help but get on the tip of my toes for a second and peek at him again. No doubt the guy was in his 30s, and if I had to be more specific, I'd be leaning more toward late 30s than early. He was wearing boots, jeans, and a blue and brown flannel, and had a 5 o'clock shadow. I could see him from the store. The more I looked at him, the more weirded out I felt. But then again, none of this was my business, and I didn't want to pry. She definitely didn't seem to be with him against her will. Ah, gotcha. I smiled, but the whole thing felt unignorably off to me as she handed me a 10. You guys on a road trip or something? Something like that. There was this turbulent mix of emotions in her eyes, and while she looked excited, definitely thrilled about something, she was also kind of seemed to be longing too. I only got a glimpse of it though, as she unexpectedly asked, "You ever just do something totally crazy? Like overnight?" I mean, I took a heroic dose of shrooms once on a whim without a trip sitter. I smirked, and she chuckled too, but shook her head. I didn't mean something like that. She paused. Anyway, have a good rest of your night. You too, I remarked. But as she turned and walked away, I felt a steadily increasing urge to say something. To ask her why she was with this guy that looked like he could be her dad. To inquire more about this crazy overnight thing she was hinting at, or this road trip-esque adventure she was on that had her at this infamous gas station at 4 in the morning. But I was just too immature at the time and selfish, even feeling like I should probably investigate what was happening. Probably pay more attention to what was going on. I also felt like I really couldn't be bothered. I told myself that it wasn't my business, that I shouldn't be nosy, but really, I just didn't want to get involved. Though, a moment after she left the store, my curiosity got the better of me again, and I peered over the cigarettes at the truck in the parking lot. She was already inside, and at first, it looked pretty unassuming. It was old and kind of a faded red, with 2x4s in the back under a blue tarp. All in all, nothing suspicious. But when he got to the turnoff on 84th, and he took a right, I noticed the passenger side window was broken, like it had been punched out. I couldn't see the girl well this far away, but her being in this older guy's truck with the right window shattered made me feel even stranger about the whole ordeal. Something was definitely off. But at the time, my lazy ass just didn't care enough. It was mid-July though, when the veneer of eccentric late-night patrons was shattered forever, and I was forced to see what was really going on. It began with a loud rumbling from the parking lot. I got immediately uncomfortable as some biker douche rolled up, revving his engine like if it were loud enough, I'd give him a discount. Then he climbed off the bike and came stumbling toward the door, the green neon flickering onto him from the window. I could tell just from the counter that he was totally hammered. He could barely even make it inside. He came right to the counter and absolutely reeked of alcohol. "Give me a pack of menthols, Camel," he slurred, leaning onto the counter with his right hand. "You okay, man?" I grabbed it. "The fuck you mean?" His hostility freaked me out just as much as it annoyed me. You're obviously drunk off your ass," I replied. "You just drove here on a motorcycle. Seems like a bad idea." "Shut the fuck up and sell me the cigarettes, man." He was glaring at me like he was ready to swing. And though he was so fucked up, I don't doubt I could have taken him. He was still a big guy, and it really wasn't worth the trouble. "Your funeral," I muttered, grabbing the cigarettes and noting it was the last pack. Normally, I would have made some quip about that, but with this guy, I just wanted him to leave. When I slid him the cigarettes, he flung his cash at me and almost walked away without his change. Then he stumbled off back out the door, shoving it open so hard I wondered if he broke it. And then, without any warning, as he stumbled along the window toward his bike, his entire body changed. My breathing stifled as I noticed his head was dented in. Multiple of his teeth were missing, and blood ran down his face and soaked his jacket. He was covered from head to toe in cuts and scrapes, and his right arm was broken, the bone jutting out slightly. I stumbled back and tripped, knocking over the vape pens, then almost slipped on them as I scrambled to my feet and chased him out the door, staring in horrified bewilderment as he climbed onto a waterlogged motorcycle, the front of it totally wrecked. "Hey, Are you alright? He just looked at me. And as he stared into my eyes, his look was totally different than before. He wasn't angry or confrontational or even drunk. He just had this totally sober look of regret. He stared at me a moment longer. Then he revved his engine, and somehow he and his obliterated bike sped off into the night, leaving me totally alone in the flickering neon. And then as soon as he disappeared up the road, the sign stopped blinking, steadily shining like usual. I sprinted over to the doors, yanking them open and almost collapsing as I barreled into the back room and landed in the seat at the computer. I pulled up the security camera footage and rewound it a couple minutes, desperate to see if somehow, some inconceivable way, I'd just been seeing things. But though I was willing to believe he wasn't actually injured and it was somehow all in my head, I wasn't at all prepared for the sight of me just talking to the empty air. That's right. The guy never even came in at all. I rewatched my harsh reaction to the absent revving of his engine, my eyes following nothing, walking along the window to the door that never opened. Then I realized that I never actually grabbed the pack of menthols. My hand stopped over it and handed nothing to no one. It was the same thing for the cash register, and then at last, I watched myself stumble back and fall, flinging shit everywhere in panic. I ran out the door, screaming into the night, but only I was there. It filled me with a terror so paralyzing I almost just left right then and there. I sat there at the desk for a moment, shaking. Was I hallucinating? I'd heard you can get permanent schizophrenia-like psychosis from psilocybin? But this was the first and only time I'd never hallucinated when not on the shit. And as I just stared at the monitor unblinkingly, shaking in place, I really couldn't tell what was more horrific. If I hadn't really seen that, or if I had. But then, my eyes gravitated to the one part of my memory that was corroborated by the cameras. The neon. It was dim, and as I unpaused the video, I watched it continue to flicker all the way until my eyes turned to the end of 84th that I could see. And as soon as they did, it shined like normal again. I rewound the footage again, and sure enough, as soon as I began to react to the phantom motorcycle, the sign started flickering. flickered the whole time, throughout that whole interaction, until the biker was gone. So I wasn't crazy. Something suggested there was more going on than me just losing my shit. But then, what the hell had just happened? I didn't even go back to the front as I began racking up my mind for all the other times the sign had flickered. And instantly, I recalled the scratch-off lady. I quickly Googled 84th Avenue deaths, thinking that maybe I could identify some of these people. But the first thing that came up was the police officer shooting. Then my jaw dropped as I stared into the memorialized eyes of Officer Brady. I could barely sit still as his eyes looked back at me from the computer screen. The same officer I had spoken to just a month ago, who didn't know about any officer shootings in the area. Because he was the officer that would be shot, I kept looking, and before long, I found the scratch-off lady. She was some lonely, divorced woman that committed suicide in the woods a couple miles north of here in 2011. And the biker had crashed into the ditch right off the bend 3 years ago. One of many drunk drivers that didn't react to the turn in time and went face first into the canal. I screamed as the chime above the door sounded, and I heard someone spin around at the front of the store, startled by my reaction. I scrambled to my feet and walked up front, freezing as my eyes met those of Officer Brady's, glinting in the flickering neon. "You good?" He seemed to be both concerned and frustrated. I just stared at him, totally unable to speak. "Yeah." "You want something?" He peered. "No." He looked at me a little longer, but then he walked his immortalized path through the gas station, his gaze drifting over the cooler of energy drinks. I couldn't help but stare right at him, utterly wordless as he moved in almost the exact same way as he had back in June. At last, grabbing that same sugar-free monster. Then he walked to the counter, and my hands were shaking as I took the drink from him. "Hey." He looked at me. "You all right?" I stared into the eyes of the dead man. "Personal stuff." "Is something going on? Looked like you were looking at the security camera footage when I came in." He nodded, and I listened in silence. If someone is prowling around here, I could investigate. I wanted to address what was really happening, to pick his mind and see if he was really unaware that he was dead, or if he was just haunting this place and all of this was an act. Then I began to wonder if maybe this was some kind of time machine. If I could warn him about what was bound to happen to him and prevent him from dying in the first place. But as I recalled the biker's corpse mounting his waterlogged Harley, I came to the conclusion that nothing I said to this visage of the officer was going to save his life. And I further waged as soon as he walked out that door, he'd be a corpse too. You there? He waved his hand in front of my face. Talk to me, kid. You look like you've seen a ghost. I almost laughed. Yeah, I'm fine. I slid him his drink. You're gonna tell me the total? It's free tonight. On me. Have a good one, Officer Brady. He blinked. He stood there for a moment as if considering investigating the gas station regardless of my cooperation, trying to get to the bottom of my unusual behavior. And maybe in life he would have. But his fateful march to the street where his life would be taken from him seemed programmed to resume as he suddenly turned and walked out the door, just like he had the last time back in June, taking his energy drink with him. I followed him outside, standing beneath the fluctuating sign as my eyes fell onto the exit wounds in his back. The red streaks oozing from the holes in his uniform. I felt like I could cry at the sight of it. I walked back inside and had made my mind up to quit then and there. I wrote up a note and left it in the manager's office. Then I locked the place up and left the key under the propane cylinder exchange out the front. About to text my morning relief where the key was when I froze. I remembered the girl. The girl with black hair and big brown eyes. The neon sign that I had once thought of as my early warning customer alert, and now understood to be some kind of paranormal detection radar, have flickered with her entrance too. Just like it had for the biker and the scratch-off lady and Officer Brady. And in that moment, I became weirdly consumed with this desire to know what had happened to her. Maybe it was because I found her cute, or maybe it was because, even in the moment that night, something felt horribly off. But for some reason or another, I became totally invested in figuring out what had happened to her, to the point that I decided to unlock the store and stick around. I went back to the computer, but for some reason, though I was able to find information about other people that had died in the area, some of whom I'd even seen walking into this gas station's very doors in the middle of the night, I was completely unable to find her. And it really ate at me. I went back to the front at some point around 5 a.m., but still, I was just searching on my phone for the girl. Though by the time my relief came in at 6 a.m., I still haven't found shit. And that was my obsession for the next couple days. When I'd exhausted every article about deaths on 84th, I began to wonder if anyone even knew she was dead. So I searched local missing persons and I looked into all of them, but still, none of them were this girl. It haunted me for days. I began reliving as much of that night as I could, trying to recall every single detail. I could remember her hinting that the guy she was with was her boyfriend, which even then was a red flag. But now, as I remembered that older guy in the parking lot pumping gas in the dark, it filled me with dread. I didn't get that good of a look at him. I could tell he had some stubble and was wearing a flannel, jeans, and boots. But what good was that? As for his truck, I wasn't sure exactly what make or model it was. Just that it was red and looked old. I could only assume the punched out glass was like the biker's motorcycle. Something that had taken place after the girl's death, or more likely, during. Then I remembered her asking me if I had ever done something crazy and overnight. And as I mulled over the words for hours, sitting on the back porch, smoking a bowl as the sun set before my shift, I ruminated on all the possibilities, such a vague statement could mean. But then, when I remembered her saying she was on something like a road trip, it started to click. The guy she was with, her boyfriend, must have been taking her off somewhere, probably far from her home. Maybe they'd been talking online, probably in secret, 'cause no parent would let their kid date a grown-ass man like that, and she seemed to be about 18 like myself. Maybe he'd driven to where she lived, and this big, crazy, overnight decision she made was climbing into the stranger's vehicle that she'd been tricked into thinking was safe, driving with him for God knows how long as he took her to God knows where. And then they stopped at the pass and go on 84th Avenue for gas. Let me hydrate real quick, thank you. At first, that part didn't make sense to me. Yeah, this place was a couple miles south of 90th Street, which came right off the highway. But why wouldn't he stop for gas at one of the many gas stations out there closer to the interstate? Though, the more I thought about it, the more I started to piece it together. If this guy was from out of state and was trying to get her back to his place undetected, it made sense he didn't pull right off the highway to the nearest gas station where cops could be combing through camera footage. Instead, he drove off to the most secluded road in the whole town, 84th Avenue. I started to feel overwhelmed. I had nothing to go off of to narrow my search really, and for all I knew, I'd have to look at missing persons listing for people in every surrounding state, and maybe even farther than that. I mean, it was just impossible. But at last, saying a prayer to whoever was listening, I typed in the vaguest string of clues I had. Missing girl, brown eyes, black hair, red truck. And then I scrolled and scrolled and scrolled. I searched it first in various counties in Iowa. Maybe she was just from a lower part of the state. But when that didn't yield anything, I searched the same sentence with counties in Missouri at the end, and then Kansas, and then Nebraska. And then, after over an hour of looking, my heart skipped a beat. I saw those big brown eyes looking back at me through my cell phone screen. I clicked on the news article, and there, in her missing persons listing, was unmistakably the girl's face, just like the one in the gas station. I immediately read the article like it was some sort of divine revelation. Alright, ads are coming in, and we will find out who this girl is when we come back. Sit tight for about a minute. I'll be back. Alright, we are back. And by me. Oh, I'm gonna change my hair. Wait a minute. Hold up. Oh. I didn't save that over here. Weird. Thank you, thank you. Alright, let's find out who this girl is. Her name was Amber Wicker. She would have just turned 18. In fact, her birthday was only 2 months ago, but her disappearance was 4 months ago. Which meant that on the night that she'd actually stepped into the gas station and not the memory I had been cohabitated, she was only 17, making the whole thing even more disturbing to me. She was last seen on her front door's Ring camera climbing into a red truck parked across the street, almost totally out of frame. But even in the glimpse of it available in the video, I could tell it was the same one when I saw the 2x4s and blue tarp. My stomach sank as I watched Amber hurry down the driveway, looking once over her shoulder to the safety of the house she was abandoning, then reaching the truck and climbing into the passenger seat before I took off up the road. I leaned back in the chair, letting out a beleaguered sigh. So Amber Wicker was her name, and as far as the police knew, she was missing. But I knew she was dead. After all, every customer that had walked in beneath the flickering sign had been a corpse, and as much as I wanted to believe otherwise, I assumed her case wasn't any different. As much as I wanted to stop working at that place, as much as it bothered me to see those ghosts walking the faded paths of their memories through the purgatory that was the pass and go of 84th Avenue, I had to stay. I had to wait until Amber came back so I could gather enough evidence to give to police. After all, though some of the dead only came in once, like the biker, others had come in twice, like Officer Brady, and even others had come in at almost weekly basis, like the scratch-off lady. Eventually, I hoped she would come back. And so, the rest of July, I picked up more night shifts, desperately wanting to be there the night she hopefully returned. I also chatted with Justin, the guy who I'd shadow and who worked nights when I was off. But his brain seemed constantly fried on something, and if he'd had any paranormal experiences, he hadn't noticed. I asked him about the sign flickering, and he said it did that on occasion, so I knew he'd seen at least some ghosts. But when I asked him about Amber, he wasn't sure if he'd seen her or not. Needless to say, I wasn't getting anything useful out of him. I asked him to just keep his eyes open for her, and if he saw her, to note the license plate of the truck by the pump. You'd think such a strange request would raise an eyebrow, but he was so zombified on whatever the hell it was he was abusing in his off time that he just said, "Sure." In the weeks after I'd pinned down Amber's true identity, I began to research her a bit. I could only find 2 articles about her. One was the one I first found, which just had the basic details of her disappearance, and the other was an even smaller article in which her parents had given a statement and a number to call if anyone knew anything. I really wanted to call that number, but I knew that right now I honestly didn't have shit. I could always say I was at the gas station that night and saw something, but the security camera footage only went back 60 days, so there'd be no proof one way or another. I didn't have a license plate, and I was a whole state over. I didn't have a lot of faith the police would be able to do much with that, and I didn't want to give her parents false hope. So I decided I'd just wait until her memory replayed again, and I could piece together some actionable details. In the meantime, the more I searched her, I was at last able to find some of her socials, but her Instagram was private and her Twitter was inactive for years. Though when I stumbled upon her Facebook, even though it too hadn't had a post uploaded in 2 years, I felt strangely more connected to her as I scrolled through her photos. This immortal anthology of a dead girl's time on Earth, floating in cyberspace for anyone to find, and sharing her memories from before her life was prematurely snuffed out. I found pictures of her laughing with her friends, smiling at a dance, blowing out birthday candles. I saw random posts ranging from her excitedly proclaiming she'd gotten her learner's permit, to complaining about failing some biology test. All these moments of this girl's life, both significant and insignificant, were here forever. Memories accessible to anyone that cared to find them. And really, her appearance at the gas station wasn't much different. Though that memory was supernatural, unfolding in real time over a real place, it was, in essence, the same. Just some moment of her existence that unaffiliated people such as myself were able to witness. Though whether or not I had been the one to see it for a reason, or my witnessing of it was just as inconsequential and random as me scrolling through her Facebook page, I felt that I was a part of this girl's story now, and it was my duty to help her however I could. But by August, she still hadn't come back. And strangely, neither had Officer Brady or the biker or even the scratch-off lady. There was only one other occurrence of the sign flickering, and I guess it was either a no-show ghost or a fuck you from the universe, 'cause no one ended up coming in. I got worried that whatever supernatural phenomenon had been taking place was over just as suddenly as it had begun, and that I'd never see her again, never be given a chance to atone for my apathetic complacency that night when I could have paid more attention to the situation that was obviously suspicious. And even worse, I was shipping off to college in just a couple of weeks. My remaining days at the Pass and Go were numbered. So on August 3rd, while sitting behind the counter in the dead of night, waiting for the purgatorial replay of an aberration's final stop on the drive to her untimely death, I made up my mind. If she didn't come in tonight, then tomorrow, I'd take the matters into my own hands. It dawned on me that Amber must have died nearby here. The only ghosts that ever walked into this gas station were those that had died on 84th Avenue, and that was true for Officer Brady, who had been shot just down the road, the biker who had crashed into the canal by the bend, the scratch-off lady who had hanged herself in the woods, and all the others I'd seen walk through those doors beneath the flickering green glow. And though I had no idea where to look, I had one thing to go off of. I'd seen that truck turn right at the turnoff. So somewhere north of here, she must have died. And maybe, just maybe, I could figure out where. By morning, I still hadn't seen her, or any ghost for that matter. And after chatting with Tegan, my morning relief, I walked out to my car. But though I'd planned on driving home and getting some sleep, then searching later, I just couldn't resist the urge to look right then and there. And so, in my Pass and Go uniform and all, I walked over to the turnoff where I'd seen that phantom truck head right, and then did the same, walking north up the road. The sun was just barely rising over the trees, and I couldn't remember the last time I'd appreciated the sunrise. Usually, I sped home, trying to beat the sunlight to my room where I could shut my blackout curtains and crash as if it were still night. Then I'd wake up at 3 or 4 in the afternoon. But this morning, moving slowly up the road along the canal and constantly scanning for anything out of the ordinary, I couldn't sleep but enjoy the orange glow above the trees. By the time I'd walked about 2 miles, the sun was fully above the horizon, and cars were starting to sparingly appear on 84th, though admittedly not many, as this wasn't the most direct route to anywhere in town except the pass and go. I'd already passed the infamous bend, and even felt obligated to pause there a moment before the canal, sort of waiting in reverent silence as I remembered the stare that biker had given me, the regret permeating his eyes. By now, though, it could no longer be considered a canal. It was a drainage ditch at best, a muddy, shallow dip off the road, and beyond it was the forest. But then, in my steady scan of the ground in front of me, I noticed something twinkling. I crouched, looking down at small shards of glass on the pavement. Almost like a vision, my mind seemed to play out this simulation, and I was staring at the man as he and Amber argued. He lost his temper and slammed her head into the window, shattering it. I noticed more twinkling coming from the grass before the ditch, and I could almost hear the sound of his boots scraping the asphalt as he kicked the glass off the downhill, trying to cover up anything that had happened. Then I noticed something yellow peeking out of the mud. I stepped down into the ditch, grabbing the corner of the plastic and pulling it out of its muddy tomb. Sitting in my hand was a faded, dirty bag of Lay's classic, mostly empty, with just a few crumbs at the bottom. My heart raced as I recalled her placing the bag on the counter, and again, I could see it before my mind's eye. The man dragging her body out of the passenger seat. Her dead weight foot scraping the bag out with her. He probably didn't even notice his panic as he dragged her toward the forest. The bag fluttered off down into the ditch below. I stepped into the forest. I walked up the hill on the other side. My breathing started to become heavy as I walked deeper into the trees, terrified as I anticipated just what nightmarish spectacle I might be about to find. But I wouldn't turn back now. And as the after image of Amber's conflicted eyes appeared in my mind again, I resolved to find where she was buried so I could finally give her parents peace and maybe even give her peace. And it didn't take much more walking to find clues. I noticed two hardly visibly scrapes in the dirt, where her shoes must have been dragging. I carefully followed them, stepping off toward a cluster of trees as they suddenly turned. At last freezing before what I could immediately ascertain was a shallow grave. The grass all around it was undisturbed, But here, in just this plot, was a clump of uneven earth. Some grass and leaves had been precariously scattered on top in the man's frantic attempt to conceal it. But it wasn't convincing. And as I crouched before the plot, my heart began to thump out of my chest. But I gulped and steeled myself, knowing I had to see this all the way through for Amber. I wished I had a shovel, but with nothing else, I just dug with my hands, scraping the dirt away and trying not to consider the possibility of my fingers abruptly touching her corpse. I jerked as I felt something that wasn't soil. Didn't feel like rotting flesh. So I brushed the sand away and my eyes centered upon a filthy blue tarp immersed in the ground. It was all I needed to see. I stayed right there, pulling out my phone and calling the police. And when they arrived within the hour, I told them I'd gone on a morning walk after getting off the graveyard shift, but I noticed the broken glass and trash on the side of the road. They applauded me on my intuition, saying they probably wouldn't have found that suspicious at all. And hell, I certainly wouldn't have either if I hadn't known the context. From there, I said I walked into the forest out of curiosity, but when I found what looked to be a trail left by dragging feet, I became convinced I'd actually found something serious. And after a little bit of digging where the ground looked abnormal, I'd seen the tarp and assumed the worst. They were kinder than cops had ever been with me as they thanked me, and in just a couple of days, it was confirmed in a news story that wrapped in that tarp and left to rot in the woods off 84th Avenue for the last half a year was none other than the body of Amber Wicker. The girl with black hair and big brown eyes, taking her next big step in life. The last big step she'd ever take. I was glad I had been able to help her family get some closure, and hell, even lead to the arrest of the bastard that killed her, whose DNA was recovered at the scene of the crime. But even still, at the end of the day, none of that would bring her back. I just felt hollow. Finding her body, providing her parents whatever relief they could find, and putting that monster in jail still wouldn't bring that innocent, naive girl back to life. And as I listened to a podcast on the graveyard shift on my last night of work at the Pass and Go, 4 days before I'd be heading off to college, I found myself constantly distracted thinking about that. But slowly, I got my mind off things, paying more attention to the podcast and starting to stare off into the space at last, the shift beginning to fly by. until just after 4 in the morning, I gasped as the neon sign flickered. I darted over to the side of the counter and peered over the cigarettes. I'll never be able to describe the feeling in my chest at the sight of that old red truck. And though I felt ice in my veins at the after image of Amber's killer pumping gas in the dark, when I found her walking to the front of the store, all that remained in my heart was an overwhelming longing and inconsolable despair. She walked into the store, the chime on the ceiling ringing as she headed right over to the snacks. I stared at her undamaged body, her clean black hair, her innocent, big brown eyes. I became emotional at the sight of it, trying desperately not to cry. She grabbed a bag of Lay's. Then she walked over to the sports drinks, and I leaned against the counter, my chin in my palm, as I gazed at this specter retracing the final moments of her life, none the wiser to the horrible demise awaiting her 2 miles away. She grabbed a red Gatorade, then walked over to me, and I felt breathless as she approached, unsure of what I'd even say. "Whoa, you alright?" She looked at me, and I must have been hiding how I felt even worse than I realized. "Yeah, I'm fine," I lied, scanning the items like a robot. I cleared my throat. "What brings you out here this late?" "Nothing really." The total came up on the screen. "Big brother?" I limply asked, nudging my head toward the heartless man in the dark. "Ew, no." "It's gross to have a brother?" I must ask the question differently this time, 'cause she stared deeper into me, asking again. "You sure you're okay, dude?" God, how I wanted so badly to tell her to run. To just get the fuck out of here, to not ever go near that man again. I wanted to tell her that she was about to die, that he was her murderer, that these were the very final minutes of her life. But this was not a time machine. It was no different than that Facebook page from years ago. Just a memory, inexplicably suspended in time. Just a brief expression of her existence that was an ephemeral an experience as her time on Earth. And nothing more. "Can I ask you something?" She raised an eyebrow. "Sure." "Have you ever done something totally crazy, just overnight? She blinked widely, visibly taken aback by the words. Yeah, actually, she murmured. Yeah, I have. Why do you ask? I shrugged. No reason. What about you? Yeah, I did once. I had this weird inkling to follow a trail into the woods, and I found a body. Called the police and reported it. Creepy, she remarked. I let out a long sigh, handing her the stuff. Hey, this is all on me tonight. All right? Sure. How come? You just look like a friend of mine. I smiled hollowly. A friend I haven't seen in a while. Anyway, it's my treat. Well, alright. Thanks. She took her unceremonious last meal, then turned over to the door, walking toward the oscillating neon. Have a good rest of your night, Carter. She glanced at my name tag, smiling slightly at me. It broke my heart. You too, Amber. Huh? I said you too. She stood for a moment, as if debating whether or not she'd heard me right the first time. Then she turned around and walked outside. But I couldn't just sit there, and before I knew it, I was running out around the counter, shoving the doors open and stepping outside. I bit my tongue at the gash on the back of her head, the blood dripping down her hair and onto the back of her top. I had guessed that had been the cause of her death, but evidently I was wrong. Because as she turned back toward me, I found her blue face and the purplish bruising of a seatbelt around her neck. Her clothes were covered in dirt and blood, and the lace bag was empty and faded, mud clumped all over it. The bottle of Gatorade was halfway empty. I trembled as I found her teary gaze, the desperation and regret staining her painfully cognizant big brown eyes, not innocent anymore. Thank you, she whispered. I couldn't possibly mutter a response. And then Amber turned. The after image of her corpse climbing into the passenger side door of her murderous truck. I remained frozen in place, my eyes following every last fleeting second of Amber's existence as the taillights glowed and the engine hummed. and the truck pulled off, pausing at the turnoff. And then, as it pulled away, turning right on 84th Avenue and heading to her shallow grave, the neon of the sign stopped flickering, leaving me standing there, alone again, in silence. That was it. That was actually a sad story, wow. It was hecking sad. My goodness. Oh my god, say so. For those that I missed out on greeting because I was reading the story, welcome in, welcome in. Also, thank you so much for the follows. Welcome. Hope you enjoyed the story. Now, we have next story. Let me change the text here for the title. I actually really enjoyed that. It was sad. Hello, Gohan, welcome in. Thank you for the follow. Okay, now, currently reading Don't Let Them In by Kate. Pin's not working. There we go. Alright. Next story we have, this is supposedly a little bit shorter, called Don't Let Them In by Maddie Kate. I have no idea. Say so. Addiction took our mother slowly, rocked her through it, and sung her to sleep sunk deep into the mattress on her bed. When her back teeth fell out, she left them on the side of the bathtub. I was 7, and I kept them in a matchbox, the missing pieces of her kept safe so that she wouldn't be lost forever. So maybe one day we could put her back together. Our house fell around us, and we tried our best to raise ourselves. The ceiling had water damage, the bottom stairs had dry rot, and in the winters, the radiators bled rust. But it was still our house, and Annie made it a home. Hi, listener. So for those of you coming in who had been here before, it is my temporary 3.0 model that I got for, it's a pay-to-use customizable model that I tried to customize it as close as I could for my 3.0 design. I will be using it together with my 2.0 back-to-back. It has different hairstyles and other customization options. Yes, yes. Welcome, welcome. My sister Annie mothered me with lopsided band-aids on bruised knees and lukewarm microwave meals. She told me ghost stories and didn't mind when I crawled into her bed later on, too scared to sleep alone. She taught me to dance, barefoot on the living room carpet, music channel on full volume on the TV shaking our pre-adolescent hips. She always let me shower first so that I could enjoy the hot water, and never complained when she had to make do with the cold. She brushed my hair every day before school, even when I screamed and hit her when she caught the tingles. Annie was dark-haired like our father, whoever he had been, but I was blonde. Annie was desperate to be blonde too, like Marilyn Monroe. Like Mom. I think she thought it would make them closer, remind Mom less of her dad. I'd give anything for her to have her hands in my hair one more time, even if it hurt. She moved to New York when I turned 18 and never came back. I still dream about her sometimes. Keeping up with our mother was impossible, and we learned from a young age that we would always be left behind. It didn't make it any easier. When she was drinking light, she was radiant and would wake us up at 3 a.m. with pancakes dripping in cherry syrup. Sometimes, when the weather was right and she'd had enough being drunk alone, she would call our school up and tell them we had both come down with summer sickness and we'd drive to the beach instead. I remember being 9 years old in the backseat of the car, coming home after one of our ocean days, sucking the salt from my fingers. Annie had just dyed her hair blonde, her best friend Jane helping her bend over our kitchen sink. From behind, I couldn't tell who was the mother and who was the daughter. Radio up and windows down, blowing the sky inside. When she was drinking heavily, she'd be out all night, hair piled up like a beauty queen, eyes glazed over and ringed with glitter and black. Sometimes she'd be gone a day or two. She would never give us advance notice. One day, we'd just wake up to an empty house, with the fridge packed full and a post-it note on its door, complete with a smear of Mom's lipstick in the outline of a kiss, telling us she'd be back soon. Sometimes she'd bring guys home, filling the table with beer cans and ashtrays, smoke up to the ceiling. Mom lost in the haze. We'd sleep with pillows over our heads, trying to drown out the music they would blast all night, and wake up to strangers at our kitchen table in the morning, asking us where we kept the coffee. When Mom drank too little, she fell apart. She wouldn't buy food, and the refrigerator went bare. She'd chain smoke, leaving cigarette burns on the wallpaper up by the stairs like the walls were sick and decaying. She barely slept, walking around with blue half-moons under her eyes, knuckles raw. She would scream at the slightest thing. I remember once when I spilled a glass of juice on the couch. She looked over at me with dead eyes and dragged me off onto the carpet, and then took every single cushion off the couch and into the backyard and set them on fire. Annie went to watch a while from the window and sat next to me on the floor, backs pressed against the skeleton of seats, head resting in the center of my collarbones. It was the worst when Mom drank too much. She'd laugh too loudly and too long at anything and everything until her mouth started to shake and she began to cry into her cereal at the breakfast table. Annie shut down when Mom was like this, going somewhere deep inside herself where no one could hurt her. She'd stay up until the morning watching old black and white movies on TV, whispering the lines she knew by heart like prayers. When I was 5 years old, I'd cry when I'd find Mom passed out on her bed, sure she would never wake up. Annie would wipe my tears and tell me she was only sleeping, like the princesses in my storybook. We'd sit on Mom's bed together and wait for her to wake up. When we were older, I was the one who would pick Mom up off the bathroom floor again and again, and Annie would put her to bed, smoothing her hair off her face, wiping the vomit from her mouth, and changing her clothes if she'd pissed herself. Watching them then, there was no doubt that Annie was the mother now. It was October, and I was 13, Annie 16. It was a Wednesday night, and Mom had been gone for 2 days. She'd called us that morning from a payphone, voice slurring, telling us she was having the best time with all of her new friends and that she hoped we were doing fine. When she asked me if I was having a good birthday, I hung up on her. My birthday had been the day before. Annie had given me a pile of presents, strawberry lip gloss, and glittery nail polishes. I didn't ask where she'd gotten the money for them. I didn't care. We'd taken the bus to the beach with Jane and ate the birthday cake she had made for me, sand getting into the frosting. It tasted like sweetness and the sea, and I savored every bite in scrape of sugar against my teeth. We watched the sun go down, Annie snapping grainy photos on her Nokia as I blew out my candles, wishing over and over that Mom wouldn't come home, that she'd stay gone this time. But that Wednesday night, Annie and I weren't speaking. Anger hung heavy between us, seeping through the floorboards. It began when she tripped at the bottom of the stairs. We'd both laughed, Annie throwing her head back, the gap between her front teeth catching the light. When I'd bent to pick her up, I felt her breath warm against the freckles on my cheeks. I let go of her arms and she fell again, hitting the floor and grinning, shaking her hair from her face. Her breath was heavy with whiskey. I couldn't start picking her up too. Couldn't watch her fall again and again. Just like Mom, I knew she'd never get back up. I'd stare down at her, blonde hair hanging over her eyes, and all I could see was our mother. Then I was running, feet slamming the hallway like heartbeats turned loose. I'd run for the kitchen and tipped every bottle we had down the sink, shoving Annie back as she fought to stop me, catching liquor on her fingers as it fell. She grabbed my shoulders and made me drop the very last bottle. It smashed between us on the floor, glass shards shining like we dragged the stars out of the sky and broken them, like pieces we could never put back. Outside through the open windows, the sky turned pale gold. The clouds a mess of pink and cream smeared across the horizon. I cried then, watching my sister on her knees, picking up the pieces. That was Annie, always trying to fix things when it was too late. The smell of food dragged me from my room, my stomach turning traitor inside my ribcage. Annie was cooking pasta, real food, not made in a microwave. She'd set the table, Tammy whined singing softly from the CD player. Annie gently swaying her hips as she stirred the tomato sauce, rich and warm. As we ate in silence, I forgave her more with every bite. Mom never cooked dinner, never remembered my favorite had been spaghetti since I was a kid, and never stayed sober long enough to sit up at the table. Annie wasn't Mom. We were washing the dishes when we first heard it. A moth was crawling down the inside of the pane, and I cracked the window to let it out into the dark. From the backyard came a faint sound. I tilted my head to listen as it was coming from far off. Crying. I figured it was Micah, the 2-year-old next door, having a tantrum loud enough for us to catch, or maybe even Lucky Strike, the cat that belonged to the junkies down the street, begging for food like he sometimes did. I always wanted to feed him when he came around, winding over my ankles, but Annie always stopped me, saying, once you start giving, they never stop taking. Looking back, I don't think she was talking about the cat. Annie flipped the Christmas lights strung up around the porch, and we sat on the plastic beach chairs, watching the skies. When we were little, we'd sit outside, and Annie would tell me the names of all the constellations and the stories of how they came to be hung up in the night sky. I had to grow up before I realized she made them all up as she went along. It was a game we still like to play now, making up ridiculous stories for the shapes we could pick out. Ah, yes. That one there is the course light. It got there when God dropped it out of his convertible window and never picked it up, she said, nodding sagely and hiding her smile. Of course, I said, waving my hands and pointing up past the power lines. Right next to the ashtray, left there by angels on a smoke break. Yeah, they say if you wish out a wish on it, all your dreams will come true, said Annie with a grin. Then she stopped laughing, and her voice grew quiet, face tilted up to all those dead stars. Let's wish, Emmy. Let's wish. So we did. The sound of wailing interrupted us. It was closer this time, and definitely human. We turned to one another in confusion. Annie shrugged, and I squinted into the black. It sounded like a baby, lost, tired, and alone. Alright, ads are starting. I'll be back in about a minute, and we'll find out what that sound is. Sit tight. Alright, must be Micah, I said, slowly getting to my feet. Maybe he walked around the back. Do you want to call Connie and tell her we'll bring him over? Annie didn't reply. I sighed and rolled my eyes. Thank you. Okay, I guess I'll do everything then. I stepped off the porch, grass soft against my heels. The air smelled like in my rain, fresh and clean and growing. A promise unfulfilled. Annie's voice was strained. I turned to her with a smile. It died on my face when I saw the look on her own. Get inside now. She was staring out into the dark, past me, and opening the door with one hand behind her, fingers fumbling on the latch. I froze, barefoot in the dirt. I'd glimpsed what she was looking at. In the bushes by the back fence, someone was crouching with their knees tucked up neatly under his chin, and his arms wrapped around his legs. His mouth was agape, softly opening and closing as he cried. Like a child lost in the dark. No, not like a child. More like someone pretending, mimicking the sound under cover of darkness. Suddenly, they straightened their back, snapping upright, face still obscured by shadow. They were tall and slim, extraordinarily thin by human standards. Oh, we pause real quick. Wow. Hello. Welcome in, raiders. Hello, Berry Plushie. Welcome. Thank you so much for the raid. How's everyone? Berry raid. Let's go. Welcome, raiders. My name is Aisha Spades. I am Ninetale Snow Fox Spirit, who is also Queen of Spades and Red Queen of Hearts. I am actually a variety game streamer, and I do ASMR about at least a couple times a week, and karaoke and art streams as well. Yes, we are currently doing partner push at the time. We are so close. Thank you so much for the raid and the support. Nice to meet you. Give me 1 second. Let me do a quick... What were you streaming today? Oh, you had ASMR as well. Hope you had a wonderful time. Welcome. If you have to go take care of some stuff, or need to eat, or get some rest, please by all means do so. I appreciate the raid so much. And otherwise, if you'd like to stick around, we are currently reading through a Creepypasta for the spooky month, Halloween. We're on the second story, about halfway in. Sit tight and relax and listen to the story. We're at the creepy part right now. Thank you again. Alright, where were we? Awesome, thank you. Have a good rest. Panic made me move, carried forward by animal instincts left over from a time when people still lived in nature. I was faster than Annie, dragging her inside and slamming the door behind us, hearing it bounce on its hinges as I locked it. We watched as the person slowly approached the house with long, deliberate strides. Annie reached for my hand, holding me tight, and turned me to face her, holding my shoulders. Don't turn around, Emmy. Don't turn around. Instinctively, I started to look over my shoulder into the gloom. Annie grabbed my face hard and shook her head. I knew then she was serious. Her voice cracked, and she cleared her throat, gripping my hand tight enough to hurt, nails digging in, grounding herself. I looked down at our interlocked fingers, both of us born of the same bones. I'm going to call the cops. And everything is going to be... Her voice faltered, stuttering. Tears spilled over her lashes. Annie never cried. Thank you, Seven, thank you. Hi, kid. Your phone's on the porch, she whispered, and bile crawled its way up my throat. Her phone was upstairs, charging. A soft tap, tap, tapping filled the silence. Annie turned wide-eyed to the window. It was the sound of someone's forehead slowly and repeatedly bumping against the glass. Then the blows accelerated, gaining in both speed and strength, skin meeting glass until they were slamming into the window hard enough to shake the panes. A moment later, the tapping stopped, and I was about to ask if I could look now, when she screamed, followed by the sound of cracking glass and a tremendous crash. Whoever was in our yard had just smashed their face hard enough into the window to shatter it. We ran up the stairs 2 steps at a time, skipping the rotted ones out of habit. I turned to look behind me once, and Annie yanked my face back before I could see. The sound of glass breaking echoed behind us as we made it to the bathroom and locked the door. A weak, mewling cry, like that of an infant calling for its mother, filled the hallway, trapped between the walls and entryways. Annie threw her back against the door, feet jammed up against the bathtub, clutching a knife she had grabbed from the kitchen. I joined her, shoulder to shoulder, and did the same. Slow footsteps started on the stairs, calculated and casual. The crying took on a mocking quality, resembling laughter, arriving in short, shrill bursts of sound, followed by high-pitched giggling, and then silence, only to start again a moment later. The first door on the upstairs floor was my bedroom, and we heard the distinct sound of it slamming open. They were looking for us. What the fuck is going on? I asked Annie, not even bothering to brush away the tears that I couldn't keep from falling. I watched my sister pick herself up off the floor and brace her hands on the door as we heard the sound of a second door slamming open. Mom's room. The next room on the hallway was the bathroom. Annie pulled me to my feet and handed me the knife. I shook my head and pushed it back to her, terrified of what would happen if I had to use it. Annie shoved me and pressed the knife into my hands, thumb pressing hard enough along the edge to draw blood. I watched a winding road of crimson rivulets cascading down her wrist. In spite of the pain, Annie continued pushing the blade into my hands. Finally, I took it from her. Something slammed against the wall that Mom's room shared with the bathroom. A high-pitched howl followed. I held my breath and felt my heart beating frantically in the base of my throat. I'm gonna get the phone from my room, my sister said. I shook my head dramatically in protest. Before I could say a word, Annie clamped a hand over my mouth. I could taste the blood on her hand, salty and sweet, like birthday cake by the ocean. Yes, I'm gonna get the phone and I'm going to call the cops. We're going to be okay. I shook my head again. It's the only way, Annie insisted. When I go, I need you to lock the door, and I don't want you to open it for anything or anyone. Not for me, not for anyone. Promise me. I shook my head, and Annie pressed her hand against my mouth, pushing my teeth against my lips so forcefully it made my eyes water. Promise me, Em. Something smashed in the room next door. Annie brushed the hair from my face and gently tucked it behind my ear. Promise, she mouthed, and unlocked the door as slowly as possible, the bolt scraping gently. I watched the curve of her shoulder disappear into the darkened hall, like the moon in eclipse. And then she was gone. I couldn't move or breathe for a second, and then I slammed the bolt shut just as something bounced off the outside of the door. A high-pitched scream ensued, followed by the handle rattling up and down hard enough to pop a screw loose. I watched it roll toward me on the tiles. And then everything went still. I sat with my back to the door, holding the knife and wishing I was holding Annie's hand instead. The silence continued. For a moment, the only sound was that of my breath slowly filling the room. A voice broke the illusion of solitude. A familiar voice came through the door. I gripped the knife even more firmly than before. Honey? What's going on? Mom? My voice cracked. Mama, is that you? I wrapped my arms around myself to keep from shaking. Sweetie, it's okay. Just open the door. It's okay. Just let me in. The handle rattled again, gentler this time. Just let me in. It's all okay. She banged impatiently on the door, and I took my handle of the bolt. Honey, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I missed your birthday. I'm sorry I'm such a terrible mother. Please. Her voice broke, and she started to cry. Just let me in, baby. I'm so sorry. I screwed my eyes shut. She sounded so sad and so lost. I just wanted her to hold me, as like she did when I was a kid, when I'd come in with a scraped knee after falling off the swings. Maybe this time she meant it. Perhaps it would be all okay. My hand found its way to the bolt again. My sister's voice came through the door, warm and gentle. Yeah, Emily, let us in. It's all okay. My hand froze on the bolt, and I tightened my grip on my weapon. Annie never called me by my full name. A hand banged on the door, handle rattling. Emily, let us in. Annie's voice became low and guttural, followed by the same shrill giggles from before. Mom spoke now, pleading and crying, her voice growing louder and louder. Let us in! Let us in! Let us in! She shouted over and over again, punctuated by her fists on the door. I thought about bedtime stories and all the demons and monsters we pray never crawl out from under our beds. That's not my sister, and you're not my mother! I screamed through the door, hands over my head. I climbed into the bathtub, curled into the fetal position and clutched the knife to my chest. I didn't know what it was outside that door, but I knew it wasn't Danny. It wasn't the voice that scolded me whenever I changed the TV channel. The one that sang me happy birthday. The one that told me I was smart even when I got bad grades. The one that read me stories about princesses that never wake up. It wasn't human. Bangs and yells came from downstairs, followed by the footsteps of people running. A low, guttural howl ripped through the house, filling the room until I felt like I was drowning in the sound. And then, the door was kicked in. I screamed, covered my eyes, and waited to die. A moment later, arms found me, lifted me from the tub, and carried me from the room. I looked at the outside of the door as I was taken downstairs. Its exterior was covered in long, scraping claw marks, stretching to the floor. I found the hallway covered in the soft, downy remains of torn-up pillows, making it appear as if it had snowed indoors. I watched the tiny feathers drift slowly as men in uniforms checked each of the rooms that looked like they had been ripped apart by something feral. Outside, police cars and an ambulance waited in our driveway, and there, in the middle of it all, was Annie, bathed in blue and red light and glowing in the dark like a neon angel. I threw myself around the officer's shoulders and ran to her. Then I held us both together, broken pieces and all, standing under all those constellations we'd concocted. Muffled screaming came from the ambulance, which rocked occasionally. Annie gently turned my head away, smiling so sadly it made my chest ache. I understood. It turns out there was no demon, no wild animal or bad men were trying to break in. It was just Mom, out of her mind on booze, drugs, and everything in between, coming to the end of a week-long binge. Something had finally broken inside her head, and this time, we couldn't put her back together, no matter how hard we tried. Sometimes, you fall one last time, and then never get back up. Annie had seen her rail-thin frame in the garden, blood dribbling from her mouth, track marks bulging on her forearms like unmapped roads, desperate for one more hit, one more fix. She'd searched the kitchen for all the alcohol I had thrown away, and when she hadn't found any, she went hunting for the stash hidden in the bathroom. She hadn't wanted me, just the drugs on the other side of the door. She'd been so high, she was able to mimic Annie's voice nearly perfectly. The real monsters are the ones that eat you alive slowly. The kind that comes in a bottle or a needle, or at the end of a long list of reasons why you can't get out of bed in the morning. Sometimes, the monsters are the ones that raise you or love you the most. But it's up to you to let them in. And that's the end of that one. Hi Jupiter, thank you for the 16 biddies. Thank you. That was crazy. I thought it was an actual monster creeping on them, but it was their mom who was drunk and high as fuck. Kinda sad too. Welcome in, new followers. Welcome. I've been doing well, thank you. Hope you've been well as well. Alright, we have one last story left to go for the night. For this one, I'm gonna turn on a certain toggle on my model. Hi now, welcome in. Dragon boost change people? Yes. I'm kinda getting hungry. Gonna have to eat afterwards. Next we have currently reading. I found a letter from my stalker by Minister of Faust. Has this been like an audiobook for you, Nowie? Okay. Yes. Gonna have this toggle on with this hair. Crazy. Croissant. Thank you. Alright, last story. I found a letter from my stalker by Minister of Fowls. I found this note nailed onto a tree on my front lawn. I really don't know how to describe it. I'll just let you read it yourself. And here's the start of the note. I'm gonna zoom in more, zoom. I saw you today. It was my birthday. You didn't see me. You hardly ever do these days. Your skin looked so nice and healthy, and your eyes, they were the most beautiful I'd ever seen them. You've grown so much. I remember how different you used to look when you were younger. I remember the day I first met you. It was 4 years ago. I was sitting at my desk, head down, listening to the teacher rattling off names for attendance. The teacher called out a name I didn't recognize, and a stranger's voice answered behind me. Was there a new student? The teacher didn't pause for a second, just continued calling out name after name. I turned my head to where the voice had come from. I saw you, a pale thing, so thin, your eyes so red, at a seat that should have been empty. I saw the fireflies flying around you, flickering, dozens of them, never straying far from you. I saw them going through you, coming out through your skin, like you were a mist to them. Can you believe I thought you were a ghost? No one else seemed to acknowledge the new stranger sitting at the back of the class. Class after class, hour after hour, passed as I waited for something to happen. For someone to notice you, for you to leave, for you to let out a ghoulish scream and claw at me like in the horror story I was certain I was in. But nothing happened. Teachers came and went, my classmates laughed and slept, and you just sat there. The bell rang for recess. The other kids ran to their mundanities for the day, leaving me and you together in this empty classroom. You stood up and pulled a chair from a desk next to you, making it face your desk. You turned your head to me and spoke. Well, you're slow today. Come on, ask me your questions. I don't know why I didn't run away screaming at that moment. Probably wouldn't have turned out better for me in the long run, but let's not speculate. I guess at that point in my life, I was pretty bloody lonely. I figured there was only a 50-50 chance you'd eat me, and the other 50 was that someone wanted to talk to me. Kid priorities don't make sense to me either these days. So I went along with the flow. I walked over to your desk, sat down on the chair you pulled for me, and asked my question. What were you? You told me you didn't know. You said that once you were a child, just like me, with parents and friends. You used to go to the same school as me. Then one day, one ordinary day, when you were 10, you just woke up and you were like this, covered in fireflies, and no one would remember you the moment they concentrated on anything else. No one, not even your parents. You told me of how I'd notice you every day. How I'd think of you until recess every day. How I'd come to you every day. How we would talk every day. How we would meet for the first time every day for the last 3 years. About how I'd forget the instant I walked out of the room. How everyone would forget you. How the fireflies would make them. How for the last 3 years you'd been alone. Your story was very hard to believe, so I didn't. I asked what reality prank show I was on. You looked, well, unimpressed and asked me to continue telling my story. I was caught off guard by the non-sequitur. You said last time I was here, I was telling you a story, a horror story about a haunted house. As you detailed the story, goosebumps prickled my skin. It was a story I'd been making up in my head. A story I hadn't told anyone yet. At that moment, a million reactions were open to me, all simultaneously adequate and inadequate. But the only thing that seemed proper was to finish the story for you, so I did. Halfway through, you interrupted me to ask if my mother had recovered from her sickness yet. I had to shake my head, a bit ashamed at the fact that I shared this private matter to a stranger. The story ended a few minutes before recess. My next class was in another room. You told me to go. Your steadiness took me back. You seemed so accepting of your fate. Like you'd already gotten used to the idea of being forgotten forever. I was a kid back then. I wasn't a particularly smart kid, and I was probably on the onset of a crush. So you can excuse what I did next as an example of my childhood stupidity. I grabbed my scissors, pressed it against my arm skin, and dug in. As it drew blood, I pushed it forwards till a cut formed the shape I wanted. Letter by letter, I carved your name onto my arm. Just so you know, I don't regret that. Don't get me wrong, kid power might have made me do it, but it sure as hell didn't make the pain go away. It was one of the most painful experiences in my life. But even as a kid, I thought what was happening to you was unfair. I remember how your eyes looked when you saw that. The confusion. How strange it was for you that anyone would want to remember. I remember that look so clearly. When I woke up the next day and saw your name on my arm, I remembered you. I didn't forget. That day, for the first time, we had a conversation that wasn't so one-sided. You said no one had ever done anything like that before and suggested I might have a mental illness. I won't deny it. That drew a little blood. As we talked, a creeping thought came into my head. Did you prefer it when I didn't remember? That night, I was sitting up on my bed, staring at your name on my arm, wondering if I should cover it up so I couldn't see it and give you back your privacy, when I heard a crash. I looked up to see my bedroom window shattered and a dirty rock on my floor. I looked out the cracked window to see a dark figure on my lawn. You were outside yelling about how we should hang out. It took me a while to get used to how bad you were at talking to people. Years without practice made you quite a bit rusty. That was alright. We had a lot of time. For the next 2 years, we spent most of our free time together. Most of the time, we talked. You'd tell me an aspect of your life and how you lived. You still stayed in your old house. Your parents never noticed the food that had gone missing, never noticed the extra room, or that you'd stolen the extra keys. One night, I confided in you that I was beginning to think you were a part of my imagination, Fight Club style. After all, what could you do to me that I couldn't do to myself? You spent the next month or so trying to leave bite marks on my ear or neck to prove a point. I still have a few scars on my ear, so I guess you did. Looking back, I could see the warning signs even then. Your skin seemed to get worse and worse, paler and paler, and you'd rubbed your eyes raw. It was in winter we had our wake-up call. The morning began like any other. I woke up, brushed my teeth, and started searching for clothes to wear. It was a winter morning, and my room was dark, so I didn't see your name in my arm. The cold sent shivers through my body and pulled out a long-sleeved jacket. A small bell rang in my head. Don't you usually roll your sleeves up? Yeah, and why did I? That was annoying. I finished tidying up and headed to school. On the school bus, I felt oddly content, like something I'd been worrying about had just disappeared. I walked up the school stairs, down the hall, through my classroom door, and sat down at my desk. The same feeling of a burden, forgotten, hounded my head. What was I forgetting? When recess came, I just sat at my desk. While my classmates ran out, it felt like a ritual, but I didn't know what for. I was contemplating just walking out to join them when I heard it. It was something small in the wind, like a whisper, but it came over and over, incessant. It sounded like my name. I knew this was strange, that this was worth my attention, but I felt oddly calm. Everything would be alright. Everything would be fine. Just ignore it. I sat there at my desk, my mind a war zone between two conflicting, contradictory voices, when I felt a force tugging on my sleeve. The moment I noticed this, my jacket sleeve tore open. I saw your name on my arm, and then your hand that had ripped my jacket open. You'd been yelling at me for over 20 minutes. I think that was the most we realized how on edge our friendship really was. One accident away from complete erasure. We spent most of the next year in the town library together, trying to find out what the fireflies were. It wasn't really a problem for me because of my mother's treatment. My family couldn't afford to go on any trips, and our house didn't have heating anymore, so I was happy to spend my time with you. Thank you for the hydrate. Trying to find information was a puzzle in of itself. After all, how would I read about people I couldn't remember, and how would you find out who was special when no one could even remember enough about them to record them? We found our old family trees and records. Individually, we'd write down the names of everyone in the book on 2 lists, and then we would compare. The names I hadn't remembered to write down, but you had, would become the focus. They were the names who were under the curse of the fireflies. We compiled a list of suspicious books we thought could help us because they were written by or were about the people who we were searching for. I read the books with the list of names side by side, reading it again for every page of the book. You scoured the internet on the library computers on the lookout for articles about the people. Our search would lead us to the first glimpse we got of what was really happening to you. It was late at night when you found the picture. I was a bit drowsy at that time and almost about to nod off when I heard a sharp intake of breath. I turned to see you standing up, pointing at the screen. I didn't see anything. Well, anything noteworthy. On the screen was a picture of a clearing somewhere in the woods. You held up your piece of paper where you'd mark out 2 names. Susie Appleby Reagan, 13, Terry Appleby Reagan, 12. Siblings. For a moment, I saw the paper and the screen side by side. Side by side. And then I saw them. Two figures emerging from the woods towards the camera. They were almost humanoid, with the exception of their limbs, which stretched to nightmarish proportions. Their blank, white skin was that of a pure albino, and looked more like tree bark than anything you expected to find on a mammal. A cloud of fireflies surrounded the duo. The shorter one looked emaciated. I could see their rib cages, around which their eyes. God, their eyes. So small, so red. The taller one, with its white hair, didn't look alive anymore. They were a little more than skin wrapped around the skeleton. Fireflies swarmed out of the pair's empty eye sockets. Both reached for the cameraman. I looked at the article surrounding the picture. It was a blog posted by a hiker 20 years after the last mention of the two kids. The picture was a mystery to the cameraman as well. He'd been wanting to go to the woods pictured for a while now, but he never actually remembered going there. The picture had just appeared on his camera one day, out of the blue. For a moment, I looked at your face. Your thin, pale face with those red-veined eyes. Would that be you when my scar faded? Just a walking horror I'd glimpse, then forget. We worked through our reading list at a much faster pace starting from that moment. Maybe we should have gone slower. At least every book, every website we'd left untouched, promised hope. The books that were finished and tossed aside promised nothing but the clearing in the woods as one's future. And we tossed aside a lot of books. I believe I tore through 3/4 of my reading list before I stumbled across the journal. Oh God, that horrible, horrible journal. The journal used to belong to a mental patient named Joey, who claimed to be a serial killer. He was locked up in an asylum when the police discovered his supposed victims never existed. He was diagnosed with a need for attention and shoved away. They should have electrocuted him. They should have fried him until his flesh melted and his hair burned. In the journal, he talked about how he carried out his killings. He knew things, bizarre and disturbing things no one else knew. He knew of strange creatures that lived in the woods. Of them, his favorites were the fireflies. I'm not going to tell you how he summoned these things. I trust you. I trust you more than anyone, but a thing like this belongs to the ground more than it ever will to the human mind. In the end, it's sufficient to know that these things were not fireflies. Joey would start his ritual by taking a kid. Any kid. Anyone he pleased. He could take them at any time, in the dead of the night, from their own homes, or in broad daylight from their front yards. It didn't matter if he was seen. He'd take them to his house and drag them inside. Usually, an Amber Alert came up at that point. He didn't care. Like I said, it wouldn't matter soon. He dragged them to a special room in his house, where the fireflies would come and latch onto them. Now, nobody was searching for the kids, not the police, not the parents, nobody. From then on, he could do whatever he wanted to the kid. He'd get bored of them after a day or two after the child had been broken. At that point, he disposed of them. Hacksaw, kitchen knife, anything would work. He detailed a large pit of bodies he kept in the woods, swarming with bugs. Hello Sonic, hi Gary-san, welcome. I'm gonna go into the Be Right Back screen. Incoming ads. Sit tight, we should be almost done with the story soon. Be back. We are back. Almost there. Wrapping up soon. Thank you. One day, I guess guess he got bored of that too. So he went right to the police station and turned himself in. Not on account of guilt. No. He just wanted someone to know about the stuff he was doing. Sick bastard. Oh, don't get the wrong idea. He never stopped killing kids. The asylum doors didn't stop him from doing what he liked. It just made him improvise. He made a new way. He modified the flies so they could survive without a host, just in a dormant state. When a child, he specified the age, would approach the swarm, it would latch on them and begin its effect. Over the years, the child would warp horribly into the things we saw in the woods. I wish I could hate him in peace. I wish I could say the world owed him nothing. But that wouldn't be true. He detailed a way out. On the final page, there was an exact explanation on how to get rid of the fireflies. You must have seen something in my face because at that moment you asked if I had found something. I said no and closed the book. A few minutes later, you shut down the computer. You picked up the last book and went through it yourself. When you reached the end cover, you tossed it aside. I asked what we should do now. You said it was all right. I could go home. We talk about it in the morning. I stood up and walked past the shelves of books. I headed for the library entrance, but stopped right outside the door and waited. I waited until I heard the sniffling sounds. I sneaked back to our table, where you were quietly sobbing. You had your head in your hands. I sat back down as you raised your eyes to me. You said you wished you'd never met me. How happy you were when you had nothing to lose. How I ruined your life. You'd never really gotten better at talking to people. That was the worst love confession I'd ever heard. I remember how we kissed that night. I remember your hands gripping my hair. I remember that kiss. I wish it could have been just a kiss. I'm sorry I ruined that moment. When my arms were around you, I was close enough to steal a firefly without you noticing. I remember holding the firefly in my hand. I remember how it struggled until it didn't. Until it was a part of me. The fireflies shifted. They came over to me and left you. I remember the familiar look in your eyes, the confusion. I never wanted to see that confusion in your eyes again. You deserve to be loved, and you deserve to know that. I wasn't really living anyway. You reached for me. I pulled away as the last lights of recognition faded from your eyes. And then you were just staring at a stranger, walking away into a crowd of strangers. That was a year ago. You've gotten so much better since then. You have so many friends. So many people at your birthday party. You also look so much healthier. I haven't been as fortunate. My skin's gotten a lot paler, and my eyes hurt all the time now. I couldn't go to school like you did all those years. I haven't wasted my time though. I found Joey's pit. The bodies. There were so many bodies. There's a grave for those children now. Without me, my mom could afford her surgery. She looked happy. Just yesterday, I saw her playing with my baby brother. I saw you crying yesterday. You were with your friends, laughing. For a brief moment, your eyes met mine, and then they were so wet. I think I'm going away. For good, I think. You're not going to be happy if I stick around. I'm so happy I met you, even if you don't remember me. And then the end of the note. Sometimes I go through depressive episodes. I feel so lonely, even with my friends. I don't know what's going through my head during those times. And sometimes I end up in a bathtub, a knife in my hands and my wrists bleeding. Until now, I thought I was cutting my wrists. I wasn't. The cuts, they're letters. I've been carving a name onto my arm. And that's it. That's the end of the story. I feel like I actually read this one a long time ago. But it was like really long time ago. So yeah. We made it to 3-hour mark. Let's go. Yeah, I don't do this that often though, so it's okay. But I think I'll remember next time if I find this one again. Hello, welcome Solace. Welcome in everyone. I will now be sending you guys off to another ASM artist. And tomorrow I will be playing a horror game for Halloween. What were the fireflies? I'm actually not sure. Some weird things that Joy guy concocted to continue with his killings. I don't know. I'll be playing Five Nights at Freddy's Into the Pit. Yeah. So we'll have fun playing that. And I do have a couple of things to show tomorrow as well. What was that? The story is called I Found a Letter from My Stalker by Minister of Files from Creepypasta on the screen. I can give you a link real quick. Give me 1 second. There you go. Alright. Hope you guys have a great rest of the day and night. I will see you tomorrow for a fun Halloween time. Tonight, I'm going to send you guys off to Annabelle, who's currently doing ASMR. Looks like she's also playing web fishing, so I can kind of see what it's like. And I would like to try doing playing web fishing on stream with the community and stream as well at some point. So we'll get that going at some point. Yeah, no problem. Thank you for staying and listening. I will see you guys next time. If you're my subscriber, you can use the raid message with the Ninetales emote. If you're not a subscriber, you can use the raid message with the blue heart and fox emotes. Oh, for sure, Fed. Caesar, welcome. Have a good night. Oh no, CPAS, I'm sorry, we're ending. Come back tomorrow. But alright, raid message is here. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Have a good one. Bye-bye. Thank you for being a wonderful audience. Be sure to check out the live streams on my Twitch channel. Follow me on Twitter and join the Discord server for updates on stream schedules and any other events, and to casually chat and hang out with me from time to time. See you next time!